Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle podcast, episode number 54. Editing is where movies are made or broken. Many films have been saved, and many films have been ruined in the editing room. Joe Dante.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my indie film hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Don't forget to head over to freefilmbook.com. That's freefilmbook.com to download your free film audiobook from Audible. And today's show is sponsored by Film Festival Hacks. How to submit your film to film festivals like a pro. And you can head over to filmfestivalhacks.com to download that. So guys, today's episode is really dear to my heart because it has to do with post-production, where I've been making my bones for the last 20 odd years, editing feature films and all the other stuff that I do. And one thing I've noticed over the years is how much filmmakers get absolutely ripped off in post-production because they don't have basic knowledge of what things cost and what to look for when hiring post-production personnel. So first and foremost, I'm going to talk about the big post houses. Now, before I start, guys, and I know I'm going to get a lot of heat over these numbers. I'm going to get a lot of questions or comments about like, oh, I can get this thing cheaper here. I can get this thing there. But that's great. And I wish you the best. These are the numbers and the prices from my experience here in Los Angeles, currently in 2016. This is what the prices are going for right now. And they're a good barometer. Doesn't mean that they're the end all and the end all and be all, and that this is Bible, this is gospel, this is what everything has to cost. No, it is my experience and what I've seen in my time in the post-production trenches. So with that said, let's start talking about big post houses. Now, I've worked for some big post houses in my day, mostly as a freelancer, thank God. But big post houses have a lot of overhead, and I'm going to tell you a little story about how post houses came to be. Back in the day, when post houses were the only places you can go get post production done for feature films or commercials or music videos or anything, they charged up the wazoo because they could, and they had to because all the equipment. Before a color grading suite I remember these color grading suites. These were $1 million color grading suites. I mean, literally $1.5 million worth of equipment in those rooms. So they had to charge $750 an hour just to start recouping their money eventually. But as technology got cheaper, these post-production suites started showing up in people's houses, like color suites and editing. Now everybody could edit on a laptop to edit a feature film. You don't have to go to an Avid somewhere in a facility that used to cost $200,000 just to edit your movie. You can do that now in the comfort of your own home. Things started changing. Now, a lot of the mindsets in post-production houses didn't change. So they would still try to charge you to like plug in a hard drive. Like I remember I took a client into a post house and I had to plug in a hard drive, and they're like, oh, that's going to be $50. I'm like, what, to plug it in and download something? Are you kidding me? But this is the mindset of post houses a lot of times, especially at the higher end post houses. So I'm talking about independent filmmakers. I've also worked a lot in commercials, and that's a whole other world. But in independent filmmakers, post houses don't make a whole lot of sense. Big post houses don't make a whole lot of sense. And I'll talk about boutiques in a second, but I'm talking about these big monster post houses that everybody knows about in your specific town. So these guys are in a lot of ways ripoffs. Now, with that said, there are deals to be made at these post houses. Sometimes the post houses are hungry and they're willing to drop their prices down. Believe it or not, I've had to compete against multi-million-dollar post houses on bids for movies that I'm shocked that they are competing with me, one guy in a post suite, comparatively to their big facilities, because times were tough and they needed to go. They're trying to go after that same client. So there are deals to be made, but to be very wary of them because they will charge you a la carte for so many different things that you won't even see coming. So if you are going to work with them, you have to have an upfront package deal and make sure everything's clear and there's no surprises if you're going to go down that road. But boutique post houses, which are smaller companies that have a handful of suites. These guys are good to work with. They generally will give you good deals, good packages. You're generally working with the owner of the company or someone really close to the owner, so it's not like this big monster corporation that you're dealing with. Again, package out deals for everything up front, and don't try to go by the hour or go by. And you're going to go nuts, and they're going to rape you. So I always like to package things out. I don't like generally going by hours, purely because it just doesn't make a lot of sense for independent filmmakers when I bid out the stuff. But that's just me. So where do you go if you don't go to these big post houses, or if you don't want to go to a boutique? Well, you go to independent contractors. A lot of independent contractors. Now, again, I'm talking about my perspective here in Los Angeles. Here, there's a million independent contractors, a million small little companies, a million guys in the back of their house with full-blown facilities that would rival anything in a big post house. That's here in Los Angeles. I'm sure there's like that in New York and some other big cities as well. But here in Los Angeles, they're literally everywhere. But if you can't find someone in your town, then you might have to go to a boutique or to a big post house, or ship it off here to LA or New York or Atlanta as well. They have a lot of facilities there as well. There's a bunch of places around the country that have a lot of depth within post-production, but New York, LA are still the two big guys as far as a lot of big post-production. Even when companies and movies are made elsewhere in the country, post-production generally always comes back to Los Angeles as far as post-production, not visual effects, but just straight up post-production. So with that said, guys, independent contractors. So how much does it cost to get an editor to edit your movie? A real editor with real credits. My experience here in Los Angeles, it's around $1,200 to anywhere from $1,200 to $2,500 a week. And they'll package out probably a 6 to 8 week run of doing an assemble cut, a polish cut, a final cut, and so on. So it's about a 6 to 8 week process. Sometimes more, sometimes less. It all depends on the deal that you can cut with that editor. Generally, that editor will have his own editing system, whether that be an Avid or a Premiere system now. Even an old Final Cut system is still very feasible nowadays for editorial, especially for independent films. It's still used a lot, Final Cut 7. But that's the price that generally you're going to look for an editor. And when you do hire an editor, please look at their credits. Make sure they've actually edited feature films. Make sure they've actually delivered feature films, and not just hire someone who says, hey, I've got an editing system. I can edit your movie. Now, you could also edit your movie yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. I would, unless you're an editor, a professional editor, or has a lot of editing experience, I would let a professional editor edit your stuff. It's going to be a better scenario at the end of it. Next, color grading, which is where I live a lot of in my color grading suite. Color grading ranges anywhere on an hourly range from $200 an hour to $450 an hour. And it can range up all the way up to $700 to $800 an hour, even up to $1,000, depending on the size of the post house and the suite. Now, a lot of times filmmakers will get wooed by a big post house because they have a big screening room and they feel like they're, big stuff sitting down in the theater, and they're color grading like, oh, this is the way James Cameron or Michael Bay must color grade, so this must be cool. That's all wonderful, man, and it's great. And if you can get a good deal on those kind of suites, God bless, go for it. But generally, those suites you're paying a lot for a good colorist, no question. But you're paying for extra stuff that you don't need. You don't need to sit in front of a theater. You can sit very comfortably in a suite with a nice 55-inch or 60-inch calibrated monitor and do wonderful work. And if you want to see a screening of it later in a big screen, you can. But that's where I've colored, a bunch of theatrical films that I've done, as well as straight to DVD and VOD movies as well. So there's no real reason to be in those big suites unless you really want to and you can afford it. But I would stay away from it, especially in an indie film budget. No need for it other than ego and just being, oh, look how cool I am. So just be aware of that, guys. Now, sound. Sound is a very mysterious thing to me. We're going to hopefully have a great sound mixer coming on the show in the next month or two. I'm going to be recording the interview soon. But general pricing for a feature film, independent feature film project. And again, this is going to be it's going to vary widely depending on the movie it is. If it's a huge action movie, if the sound has been done horribly on production, there's a lot of variables. So please use this range of money as a real rough reference. But anywhere between $15,000 to $50,000 to do a full mix, ADR. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Foley, real Foley with like a real Foley stage, not just sound effects. Sound editing, final mix, 5.1, the whole ball of wax of deliverables, anywhere between $15,000 to $50,000 is probably a decent range in the independent film world. It could obviously go higher than that. And that's one thing that you actually really do need to go to a post house for. Post-production sound is something that's extremely difficult to do in the back of someone's house. Now, you can, don't get me wrong, and I know a bunch of guys who do, but in order to get real ADR booth, unless that guy has built out a real ADR booth, if they have a real Foley stage, which truly I've yet to see a Foley stage in someone's back house. At that point now that they're turning it into a big post facility. So, you need a post facility to do that kind of stuff, especially for high-end sound, at least for Foley and other things like that. So I suggest going with a post-production audio house, not a big post house that happens to have audio in it, an actual company that specifically does audio. And they will work with you on price generally. Like I said, I've seen budgets much lower than $15,000 for a full feature, but they're very variables. If it's an easier movie, if it's a drama that doesn't have a lot of action, the sound was recorded properly, there's a lot of variables that you have to take in consideration. But generally, anywhere between $15,000 and $50,000 is a good range. If you've shot well, you've got good audio, things are been organized well in post-production, you have a post-production supervisor who's organizing it, $15,000 to $20,000 is a pretty fair price. You might get it a little cheaper, but generally you do get what you pay for when you're working with audio as well. So make sure the house has experience doing this. And I'm going to just say this as a blank statement, guys. And I've heard this too many times. I've heard from other filmmakers from around the country that were in, I'm not going to say the cities, but let's say other cities besides Los Angeles or New York, and they went to their local big post house to do their features. And these guys rape them because they're charging them commercial rates. So I would come back like, yeah, these guys charge us $75,000. And I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? $75,000 to do all their audio and to do all their color and their editing. And they have no idea what they're doing because they've never done a feature film before. So if you are going to go with these big post houses and they're not accredited or have a lot of credits or have a lot of experience in feature film, in independent feature film specifically, stay away. Be very, very careful because these guys might have good intentions. Maybe they just want a credit. They're like, oh, I want a feature credit under my belt. But you might end up paying more for it later. So be very, very cautious when working with a post-production company that does not have credits in independent filmmaking or independent films because you will pay for it later. I've seen it happen many, many, many times. Okay, guys. So now let's going to talk about a little bit about deliverables. Now, their deliverables list could go on. Deliverables, by the way, are things distributors ask for masters of your movie when you're all said and done. I'm going to kind of go over this really quickly. This list I could talk for about an hour or two just about this stuff, but I'm just going to go the big boys, the big things that you should look out for, okay? So a DCP, a digital cinema package, which is basically your digital film print, that ranges anywhere from $800 to $5,000. I remember when they first came out, you couldn't even find one for less than $5,000. Now I've seen them for $700, $800, no problem. Now, mind you, when you're paying $700 or $800, you might not be able to see it in a screening room because the price is so low. When you start going up higher in price at the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 range, you'll be able to view that specific DCP in a screening room to see if it works. If not, you're going to basically just get a bunch of files and then take it to the theater, wherever it's going to play, and test it there. I think that's fine. You don't need to see it in that DCP. If there is a problem with the DCP, they have to replace it. They have to do it again, and make sure you negotiate that when doing it. Next, currently still people are still mastering to HDSRs, which are your tape backups. This is still only at 1080p to my knowledge. I think they might have just released a 2K version, but I'd have to actually go and check on that. But so far, I haven't seen any deliverables asking for 2K tape masters just yet. But HDSRs, a big post house is going to charge, or a big dub house is going to charge you $1,850. I've seen it up to $2,000 for an HDSR. HDSR will carry your movie, your full, all your visual, as well as 10 tracks of audio. So you can have your 5.1, your stereo, your M&E tracks, and so on, all included in this one master tape. It's very valuable. Smaller dub houses where a more reasonable price to get is around $1,100. I've seen them cheaper. Just be careful who's doing them. Just because they have a deck doesn't mean they know what they're doing. So just make sure they know what they're doing. But $1,100 is about $1,150 is a fair price for HDSRs. And doesn't matter if they're copies or masters going to tape. And if anyone tries to charge you output to the tape from the Final Cut or Premiere or wherever they're Avid, and they're charging you extra for that first output, run away. These guys are thieves. No one charges for that. If they do, they're thieves. Don't. Just find a place that won't charge you for the initial output, for God's sakes. That's ridiculous. That's old post house mentality, not current day realities. And finally, guys, digibetas. I know they're archaic, but they are still asked for by a lot of distributors because of overseas. A lot of overseas countries are still on digibetas, on standard def. They haven't even upgraded to HD yet, so they ask for digibeta masters. Digibeta masters on NTSC is about anywhere between $450, like $250 to $450 for a feature film, for a 90-minute or 120-minute movie. I would, a good price anywhere. I mean, and honestly, $450, $250, it's around that area. Honestly, you were talking about $100 here. Might mean a lot to you, but I would say $450 is not a horrible price. $350, $250, if you can get them, that's the prices you need to look for. And then expect to spend at least another $50 to $100 for PAL versions of that, whatever those might be. Some people don't charge more for PAL. Some people do. You just have to kind of check that out. So I hope this episode was helpful to you guys. It's a way, I really don't want my filmmakers and my tribe members to get ripped off in post-production. And this is just a real quick glance, real quick overview over that. There's so many different things inside of post-production that could, cost. I didn't even begin to talk about visual effects, which is a whole other conversation. But there's a lot of different things in post-production where you have to you can and will get ripped off. So just be very careful. Do your research. Talk to a post-production supervisor. Like I always say, even consult with them. Again, I'm a post-production supervisor. I consult all the time, even if you can't afford me as a full-blown post-production supervisor throughout the entire process. Even a consultation for a couple hours would save you thousands of dollars going down the road, because at least we can guide you in the process of what you really need, what you really don't need, how much to spend, how much not to spend, and so on. So if you guys want to hire me out as a post-production consultant, please just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/consulting. And I am currently working on a post-production workflow course that's going to cover a lot of the stuff I talked about in much more detail, and really hopefully have a resource for you guys to help you make your movies and not get ripped off in the process in post-production. I wish you guys nothing but the best of luck. Don't forget to head over to filmmakingpodcast.com and leave us an honest review. It really, really helps out the show a lot. So thank you so much for listening, guys. As always, if you want show notes for this, it's going to be at indiefilmhustle.com/054. Keep that hustle going, keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.